There are times when we feel like we're on top, that we hold the reins of life firmly in our hands, that we know what is right, and that our influence is a blessing to others. But it is in those moments when we feel strong and unwavering that what will one day bring us to our knees can begin to grow quietly. For power, invisible, intoxicating, and often misunderstood, is not just a gift, but a test. And if we do not experience it in humility and purity of heart, it will become an instrument of our spiritual blindness. This narrative is a journey into our own interiority. It is about encountering the shadow that hides under the cloak of light. It's about how subtle the abuse of power can be when it is born out of a conviction of one's own truth. And most of all, about how through pain, repentance, and silent recognition, one can find one's way back again to a light that cannot be owned, only permeated. I used to think that power was a gift. That if I gained it, I could right wrongs, protect the weak, eliminate chaos, and bring order to the light. There was a sincere desire to create, but just as deeply, perhaps even more deeply, there was a longing for recognition, influence, and most of all, control. I didn't realize that the more I longed to control, the less I ruled myself. At some point in my life, I found myself in a position where I had influence. People listened, conformed, acknowledged. At first, I felt like a light bearer, an agent of a higher purpose. But over time I began to find that the light shining around me was not entirely pure. There was an admixture of shadow, a subtle, almost imperceptible stream of pride masquerading as competence. Anger that masqueraded as righteous indignation. Fear that masqueraded as responsibility. It started subtly. Excessive control over those around me because I knew better. Suppression of another person's opinion under the guise of not being mature yet. And then came the first blow, an illness in the family that set up my own unspoken emotions as a mirror. I noticed that in the moments when I was most convinced of my truth, reality began to crumble around me. People moved away, communication stiffened, and my body began to send signals I had long ignored. One night I sat in silence, absorbed in a restless prayer that did not want to be said aloud. I sensed that there was no peace in my heart, but tension. That even my spiritual endeavors were burdened with wanting to be holy, to be right, to be above it all. And that's when I saw for the first time that abuse of power doesn't have to look like evil in a black cloak. It often cloaks itself in light. And that's why it's so dangerous. He who would be greatest among you, let him be servant of all, goes the old saying. How often I have repeated it to others and how little I have lived it in myself. To serve is to be quiet. To listen even when the mind is already formulating a response. It means letting go of the desire to change others and instead letting ourselves be changed. It was then that I began to observe my thoughts as a current that either heals or destroys. I remembered times when I raised my voice to set boundaries, but deep down it was just a burst of unresolved childhood grief. When I shamed another because they had the humility to accept the truth, it was really an escape from my own insecurities. The energy I was sending out came back to me not immediately, but unmistakably. I was caught in a crisis once. People I'd trusted turned away from me. My work was not going well, my body was giving me a hard time. I fell to my knees. Literally and internally. Where there's no more power, no more position. Just silence, pain, and questioning. Who am I if I lose everything? The answer didn't come right away. Only silence. But the silence was different than before. It wasn't empty. It was full of a presence that doesn't judge. As I melted into it, I felt that my being was not defined by what I control, but by what I love. And that love is not an emotion that comes and goes. It is a force that flows through everything when we don't stand in its way. Abuse of power is not just an act, but a state of consciousness. It is the place where I forget unity and begin to believe in my own separateness. It is pride that whispers to itself, "You know better." It is the restless heart that seeks affirmation of its worth through control of reality. And it is also the pain that has not been accepted and transformed into compassion. The return process was long. Every day I noticed where I still wanted to be right. Where I was still pushing for results. Where I'm laughing from a position of superiority. And I was learning to let go. Not through strength, but through submission. Not resignation, but acceptance. I learned to see the body as a mirror of the soul. When the tension in my back echoed, it was a cry that I was carrying more than I needed to. When my head hurt, it was proof that I trusted my mind more than my heart again. And when I was relieved after a prayer full of repentance, not guilt, but that true repentance that comes from knowing one's own hardness, I knew I was one step closer to home again. Often the phrase, "To the pure all things are pure," echoes in my heart. It is a reminder that the outside world is not the problem. The problem is the coloring of my perspective. When I view the world through the desire for power, everything becomes a tool. When I look through love, everything becomes sacred. I once stood across from a man I used to judge. Now I saw him with different eyes. Not as someone who makes mistakes, but as a wounded soul who seeks the light as I do. In that moment, I understood that the greatest strength is not in the ability to change others, but in the willingness to love them exactly as they are. I have prayed differently ever since. Not for success, not for answers, but for the purity of my heart. I pray that my presence will be healing. For my words to be true not just in content, but in energy. That even my silences be imbued with love. The power I once wanted to have over the world, I have given away. Not because I was afraid of it, but because I understood that true power is not in control, but in surrender. In the ability to be open, vulnerable, humble. In the willingness to love even when it hurts. And sometimes when I feel the old patterns returning, the need to be better, stronger, wiser, creeping in, I stop. I close my eyes and breathe. And I whisper to myself, only love is real. In that silence, everything straightens out. A stream of light flows through my heart again, not of my will, but of its nature. I no longer want to be the one holding the reins. I want to be the one who serves. The one who becomes the space through which the higher order flows. And I know that every fall, every pain, every shadow was just a call to return. A return to that which has never gone away, to the love that holds, guides and heals all things. And so today I understand that true renewal comes not through victory, but through a change of heart. Every moment I refuse to control and instead choose trust is a step back to the original light from which I came. Every act done out of love, no matter how subtle, heals not only me but the world around me. Abuse of power is not the ultimate mistake, but a call silent and urgent to remember who I really am. Not the one who holds the reins, but the one through whom grace flows. And then, when I manage to silence the old patterns for a moment, to stop the anger, to quiet the pride, and to open myself to love without conditions, I know that I have truly come home for that moment. Not to my personal power, but to the light that has no beginning and no end. To a light that never abuses because it knows that all is one. Thank you for watching. If you liked the story, give a like and subscribe.